Welcome to the African Weekly Roundup, a weekly program every Sunday here on HORUFADHI Media, where I discuss the latest news and events across the African continent. I'm Sultan Mohammed, your host and producer here on HORUFADHI Media. We hope you find this program very informative. Please like, share, and for similar content, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media. Also, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media Group's second channel, known as HORUFADHI TV, where you are currently watching this program, and where you can find other exclusive programs, such as Behind the Scenes and Mahaisal, among others. And last but not least, do follow myself, Sultan Mohammed, Suleiman Hashi, Yasin Abdi, and the wider HORUFADHI Media team on our social media platforms that should appear on the screen any moment. Let's get straight into the headlines. And we kick off in Sudan, where Sudan's rival military forces accuse each other again of fresh violations of ceasefire on Sunday, as the deadly conflict rumbled on for a third week, despite warnings of a slide towards a civil war. Now, hundreds of people have been killed and thousands wounded since a long-simmering power struggle between the Sudani army and the paramilitary force known as Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, erupted into a conflict on April 15th, which is last month. Now, both sides said a formal ceasefire agreement, which was due to expire at midnight, would be extended for a further 72 hours in a move the RSF said was in response to international, regional and local calls. Now, the army said it hoped what it called the rebels would abide by the deal, but it believed they had intended to keep up their attacks. Now, the parties have kept fighting through a series of ceasefires secured by mediators, including the United States government. Now, the situation in Khartoum, where the army has been battling RSF forces entrenched in residential areas, was relatively calm on Sunday morning, according to local journalists. Now, the army said on Sunday it had destroyed RSF convoys moving towards Khartoum from the west. Conversely, the RSF said the army had used artillery and warplanes to attack its positions in a number of areas in Khartoum province. Now, in an apparent bid to boost its forces, the army said on Saturday that the Central Reserve Police had begun to deploy in southern Khartoum and would be deployed gradually in other areas of the capital. Now, Sudan's military, or police shall I say, said the force had been deployed to protect markets and property that had been subjected to looting. Now, the RSF on Saturday warned it against becoming involved in the current fighting between itself and the Sudani army. Now, the police force is a large and heavily armed division of Sudan's police that has fighting experience from conflict in western Darfur region and the Nuba Mountains in southern Sudan. Now, in March 2022, the United States government imposed sanctions on the reserve police force, accusing it of using excessive force against protesters who were demonstrating against a 2021 military coup, which led to the current government that exists. Now, the fighting in Khartoum has so far seen RSF forces fan out across the city, as the army tries to target them largely by using airstrikes from drones and fighter jets. Now, the conflict has sent thousands of people fleeing across Sudan's borders and prompted warnings the country could disintegrate, destabilize a volatile region, and prompting foreign governments to scramble to evacuate their nationals. Now, the US has sent a Navy ship to take its citizens, two US officials said, as Britain announced it had arranged an extra evacuation flight from Port Sudan on the eastern Red Sea coast on Monday. Now, nearly 1,000 Americans have been evacuated since the violence began, the US State Department spokesman Matthew Miller said in a statement, adding that the government's convoy arrived in Port Sudan to take US citizens and other eligible people to Saudi Arabia for further transit assistance. But underlining the extent of the instability, Canada said it was ending its evacuation flights because of dangerous conditions. Now, the prospects for negotiations have appeared bleak. There are no direct negotiations. There are preparations for talks, the UN Special Representative in Sudan, Volker Perthes, told journalists in Port Sudan, adding that the regional and international countries were working with both sides. Now, Perthes told media, Reuters for instance, on Saturday that the sides were more open to negotiations than ever before. Now, the army leader, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, said he would never sit down with the RSF chief, General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hameti, who in turn said he would only talk after the army ceased its hostilities. Now, Saudi Arabia's Foreign Minister Faisal ibn Farhan, whose government has played a part in mediating the ceasefires between Burhan and envoy Dafala al-Hajj Ali in Riyadh, and called for calm, the Saudi Foreign Minister said. Now, adding to the diplomatic pressure, the UAE's Vice President Sheikh Mansour ibn Zayed had phoned Burhan, state news agency WAM reported. With the United Nations reporting only 16% of health facilities in Khartoum operating as normal, the International Committee of the Red Cross, or ICRC, delivered 8 tons of medical aids thus far. But while approval had been given for the supplies to go to Khartoum, negotiations were ongoing with sides to facilitate delivery within the city, where hospitals, convoys and ambulances have been under repeated attack. The UN aid chief Martin Griffiths said on Sunday that he is traveling to the region to explore how they can bring immediate relief to the millions of people whose lives have turned upside down overnight. Now, he urged safe passage for civilians fleeing hostilities and for combatants to stop using medical personnel, transport and facilities as shells. At least 5 aid workers have been killed in the fighting so far. A third of Sudan's 46 million people needed humanitarian aid before the fight even begun. And the conflict has derailed an international-backed political transition aimed at stabilizing or establishing a democratic government in Sudan, where former autocratic President Omar Hassan al-Bashir was toppled in 2019 after 3 decades in power. Now, at least 528 people have been killed and 4,599 wounded, the health ministry said. The United Nations has repeated similar number of deaths, but believes the death toll could be much higher. And over to Kenya, where the death toll linked to a doomsday cult in the country hit 201 on Saturday after police exhumed 22 more bodies, most of them bearing signs of starvation, according to the Coast Regional Commissioner. And the bodies are believed to be those of followers of a pastor based in the coastal Kenya region, Paul Mackenzie. He's alleged to have ordered congregants to starve to death in order to meet Jesus. Now, more than 600 people are still missing. Now, Mackenzie himself was arrested last month and remains in custody. Police plan to charge him with terrorist-related offences, as hundreds of bodies have begun being dug up from dozens of mass graves spread across his 800-acre property located in the coastal county of Kilifi. Now, Mackenzie insists that he closed his church in 2019 and moved his property in a forested area to farm. Autopsies conducted on more than 100 bodies last week showed the victims died of starvation, strangulation, suffocation, and injuries sustained from blunt objects. Now, local media outlets have been reporting cases of missing internal body organs, quoting investigators in the case. Now, Mackenzie, his wife, and 16 other suspects will appear in court at the end of the month. Now, the Coast Regional Commissioner, Rhoda Onyancha, on Saturday said the total number of those arrested stood at 26, with 610 people reported as missing by their families. It is unclear how many survivors have been rescued so far from the search and rescue operations on Mackenzie's vast property. Some of them were too weak to walk when they were found. Now, cults are common in this African country, which has a religious society. Now, police across the country have been questioning other religious leaders whose teachings are believed to be misleading and contrary to basic human rights. Now, President William Ruto last week formed a commission to inquire an investigation on how hundreds of people were lured to their deaths at the coast and recommend action on institutions that failed to act. Now, Mackenzie had in the past been charged with deaths of children in his church in a case that continues to be ongoing in court as we speak. Residents nearby had raised the alarm after his followers moved to the forested area. Now, over to West Africa, where Mauritania votes on Saturday in its first legislative and local elections since 2019, when President Mohamed Ould Ghazouani came to power in a litmus test for the veteran leader ahead of his next year's presidential vote. Current leader, who has overseen the West African country's relative stability in a violence-wrecked Sahel, is widely expected to seek re-election next year, though he has not confirmed his plans. His Al-Insaf party is favoured to win amongst 25 parties vying for the backing of around 1.8 million voters, who are set to choose 176 members of parliament, as well as 50 regional councils and 238 municipal councils. There were snaking queues outside polling stations in the capital. Now, Al-Insaf's leading challengers are the Islamist movement Tawassul, the main opposition party in the outgoing parliament, and the Arab nationalist Sawab. I'm coming because of a sense of duty, obviously, Mohamed Ould Sheikh, a 30-year-old mining agent, told AFP. Our duty is to contribute to the development of democracy, peace, and development depend on it, he said. Campaigning has been in full swing since April 27th, 2023, with main parties setting up large tents in the capital. Al-Khadar Al-Lamin, an 18-year-old student voting for the first time, said he was hoping for new opportunities for young people. For the first time, voters can choose a list of candidates younger than 35 for whom 11 seats will be automatically attributed in the National Assembly. Now, results from the first round of voting are expected within 48 hours of poll closing. A second round is scheduled for May 27th for the half of the 176 National Assembly seats. Now, cost of living has been a major concern in the country. Ghazouani, the current president, is a general considered one of the main architects of Mauritania's success against jihadism in his former role as army chief. The country's population is divided between Arab, Berber, and Moors, Afro-Mauritanians descendant of slaves, and other groups of sub-Saharan African origin. Now, Ghazouani made the fight against poverty one of his priorities, carrying out an ambitious social program that has included distribution of food and money to the poorest. But the economy has slowed down since the COVID-19 pandemic, and rising inflation due to the war in Ukraine has put the cost of living concerns for the forefront. Now, Al-Insaf, the current ruling party, had a comfortable majority in the previous parliament, and analysts have predicted little threat from rival parties. The Tawassul Islamists party are seeking a strict application of Islamic law and are again expected to be the main opposition party in parliament. Now, Sawab, the Arab nationalist party, is allied with the anti-slavery activist Biram Dah Abid, the runner-up in the last presidential election, who has long advocated for descendants of slaves, a community to which he belongs. And finally, over to South Africa, where South African officials have hit back at US accusations that the Russian ship collected weapons from a naval base near Cape Town late last year. The US ambassador to South Africa, Ruben Brigty, said on Thursday he was confident that a Russian ship under US sanctions took on board weapons from Simonstown base in December, suggesting the transfer was not in line with Pretoria's stance on neutrality in Russia's war against Ukraine. Now, Western diplomats were alarmed at South Africa carrying out naval exercises with Russia and China this year, and at the timing of a visit by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. South Africa is one of Russia's most important allies on a continent divided over its February 2022 invasion of Ukraine, but has said it is impartial and has abstained from voting on UN resolutions on the war. Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin on Friday discussed the conflict in Ukraine in a phone call with South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa, the Kremlin said. Now, Ramaphosa's office said on Thursday that an inquiry led by a retired judge would look into the US allegations, and on Friday, a minister responsible for arms control and foreign ministry spokesman said South Africa had not approved any arms shipment to Russia in December. He did not say whether or not an unapproved shipment had left South Africa. Now, South Africa's Defense Department said on Friday that it would give its side of the story to the government's inquiry. Now, Brigety, the US ambassador, was summoned on Friday by the South African Foreign Ministry, which expressed the government's utter displeasure with this conduct and statements made yesterday. A statement from the ministry said. It said Brigety admitted that he crossed the line and apologized unreservedly to the government and the people of South Africa. There was no immediate comment from the US Department of State. Now, White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby on Friday declined to get into the specific allegations against South Africa, but reiterated Washington's position about any country aiding the Russian war effort. After leaving Simontown, Refinitiv shipping data showed the vessel Lady R sailed north to Mozambique, spending January 7th to 11th in the port of Beira, before continuing to the port Sudan and on to the Red Sea. It arrived in the Russian port of Novorossiysk on the Black Sea on February 16th, the data showed. AP news agency reported that the record showed that the Lady R ship was tied to a company that was sanctioned by the US for transporting weapons for the Russian government and aiding its war effort. And finally, to Senegal, where Senegal's health ministry confirmed a case of Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever, or CCHF, in a hospital in the outskirts of the capital, Dakar, it said in a statement. Now, the case was detected on April 21st in Dalal Jam Hospital, in the health ministry said in a statement released late on Saturday. A health emergency task force has been activated to oversee the response. Now, CCHF is a tick-borne virus that can also transmit between humans by close contact with blood and bodily fluids, the World Health Organization says. It has a fatality rate of between 10 and 40%, and endemic in Africa, the Balkans, the Middle East, and some Asian countries. CCHF symptoms include fever, muscle ache, dizziness, light sensitivity, vomiting, and can lead to organ failure and internal bleeding. It was first detected in the Crimea region in 1944. Recent outbreaks in Africa have been limited in scope. According to the African Centers for Disease and Control Prevention, the largest recent outbreak was detected in Mauritania in 2013, with 35 cases and 6 deaths. South Africa has had 17 cases and 5 deaths in 2011. And those are the top stories on our program this week. Please tune in next week for further headlines across the African continent.